Decolonization and provincialization are two processes that, in the context of academic discourse, aim to address and undo Eurocentric biases that still linger in the structure of the Enlightenment University, with its division of knowledge into the natural sciences, the humanities, and the social sciences. What is the relationship of the field of Romanticism to these processes? How are these processes related? How are they different? And why is it important that decolonization and provincialization take place together? A key legacy of Romanticism, in terms of the history of knowledge, is the ordering and study of humanity according to categories of languages and peoples. This legacy persists not just on the site of Romanticism's European origin, but all over the world as a global legacy. Some view this legacy as a blessing, some as a curse, still others as a luxury or inconvenience. I find that it continues to have immeasurable value as an institutional structure for gathering diverse interlocutors for the project of fulfilling a common promise. We may need to shake up our metaphysical assumptions first by reminding ourselves that humanity as such does not exist already, but rather functions as an abstraction with a history of reconceptualizations and misconceptualizations. Prior to Romanticism, European Enlightenment thinkers achieved the task of shifting this abstraction from a Christian theological basis, founding the notion of humanity instead on the principle of reason. Beyond this punctiform logical universalism, Romanticism would give substance and complexity to the abstraction of humanity through historicist and localist attention to languages and peoples, as that which exist in plural and historically lived forms. It thus opened up the possibility of approaching the singularity of humanity as that which emerges dynamically in conversations and interactions between languages and peoples, rather than as that which pre-exists and therefore can be defined apart from such interactions, as if imposed from some fantasized outside upon a plurality of beings in different life worlds. Decolonization addresses the ills that ensue from the imposition of the idea of universal humanity as if it issued from a mono perspective, rather than immanently and dynamically from processes of conversation and interaction among plural and heterogeneous partners. It addresses histories of subjugation and brutality, wherein the ordering and study of humanity according to categories of languages and peoples takes hierarchical form. While colonialism has taken place in various formations all over the world long before the acceleration of European expansionism in the era of the Industrial Revolution, the colonialist imperialism of European modernity saw the emergence of race as biopolitical category and racial hierarchization in the configuration of labor, the conception of subjecthood, and the ordering of languages and cultures. The decentralized vision of linguistic nationalisms, championed by Herder in the late 18th century, would receive hardened hierarchical articulation in the writings of such later 19th century figures as Renan. Decolonization addresses itself to the ills of racial and linguistic cultural hierarchization and to Eurocentric biases that inform the false universalisms that are often complicit in such hierarchization. Decolonization exposes how false universalisms may mask structures of inequality and suppress and regulate the coming to speech of racial minorities within a dominant culture. As Gayatri Spivak has conceptualized, subalternity cannot speak, but makes itself heard, paradoxically, as silence or voicelessness within a system of voicedness as defined by a dominant episteme. Decolonization may respond to this predicament of voicelessness in several ways. For instance, conservatively, by giving voice to the voiceless through inducting and assimilating the previously voiceless into a system where their wishes can be voiced. Or, more radically, by putting into question the very terms of the system of voicedness itself and setting into motion the tremors of epistemic change. That one who is voiceless within one system or life world may be otherwise inscribed within another system of voicedness in another life world marks the crux where decolonization links up with provincialization as necessary supplement. If decolonization addresses biases of Eurocentrism within the languages and discursive systems of former European colonizers, provincialization unsettles monoculturalist tendencies to privilege, even while undertaking critique of this framework, distributing attention also to the ways different life worlds are implicated with one another. As conceptualized by Dipesh Chakrabarty, provincialization is a process that demands multiple partners to connect scenes of decolonization within one framework to scenes in other modernities that operate and evolve according to logics that are distinct from, yet in conversation with, Western modernity. With its historicist philological turn to the study of humanity, according to categories of languages and peoples, Romanticism pushed Europe to discover its own heterogeneity and its own provincialism as province among provinces. The West has not always lived up to this discovery, of course, and arrogated its values over those of others. The legacy of Romanticism has not remained confined to Europe or the West, however. As an event in the history of knowledge, it has exerted its effects throughout the 19th and 20th century global transformation of universities, providing a framework of connection between linguistic and textual traditions in institutional contexts all over the world. It has reoriented criteria and procedures for the reclassification of texts, and thus the interpretation and debate of fundamental questions in complex and ongoing traditions. Locally, within the context of the North American Academy, where I currently work, provincialization requires foreign language pedagogy at the level where knowledge of foreign languages involves enlivening self-critical estrangement from English itself. It thus involves appreciation of the multiple levels of language, in which language and languages are not just instrumental and vehicular, but vital media of self-interrogation in which saying and meaning do not always meet neatly. On the level of research, provincialization requires revising naive assumptions that non-Western literatures began belatedly, derivatively, or reactively in response to the West, and that theory is an export from the West. Reclassifications of long-standing textual practices as literature did not follow Western models so much as enter into conversation with the modern Western redefinition of literature as imaginative writing, as that unstable object, both vulnerable to the consolidations of crude nationalisms, as well as strangely vital and resistant to such determinations as well. Long-standing critical interrogations of language itself have taken place in multiple philosophical and linguistic traditions in comparable yet non-totalizable ways. These complex histories need to be registered in theoretical approaches that all too often impose a scientistic meta-perspective indifferent not just to the differences that languages make, but to the difference that language makes as non-self-consistent medium in which we human beings not only work and trade, but desire, dream, and love. Insofar as the promise and methods for cosmopolitan humanities are intrinsic to Romanticism, the field can play, in my view, a key role in the task of fostering capacious conversations that generate vital new questions and paths of inquiry. Okay.